This panel I'm particularly excited about personally because I talked about an interdisciplinary perspective on the issue of AI and how important that is. And we have with us a stellar panel of not only the technologists, but also people who work in the activist space and linguists as well. So I understand that Dr. Teo is with us via Zoom. Dr. Leslie Teo is Senior Director of AI products at AI Singapore. And I've relied on a lot of his technical work in my own research. So I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Leslie Teo to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
Next, can I please welcome Ibu Ayu Purwarianti, who is the head of the Center for AI at the Bandung Institute of Technology. She just arrived, so warm welcome to you, Ibu. I've also learned so much from Ibu Ayu during my own research, so I'm particularly thrilled to have you here with us. Anyway. Could I also welcome Ms. Shalini Joshi, who is a program director at Meedan. We've only seen each other on Zoom, so I'm very excited to have all of these experts in person. And then, certainly, last but not least, may I also welcome Bapak Endang Aminuddin Azis, who is a professor of linguistics, pragmatics and forensics from the Indonesia University of Education, and one of Time 100's most influential people in 2024. So as with previous panels, we'll begin with 5 to 7 minutes presentations from each of the panelists. I'll just gently remind the panelists that we are standing between lunch. And so if you could all be concise in your remarks, that would be much appreciated. We'll begin with a recorded presentation from Dr. Leslie Teo, and then we'll go down the line, as it were, and then we'll finally open up for a moderated conversation. So Dr. Leslie Teo, can I pass the screen and mic on to you? But can I have the presentation queued up and ready to go, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Apologies for not being able to join you at this great conference. But thank you for the opportunity to tell the story behind Sea Lion. Sea Lion is an open source, regionally driven effort to build representative AI for Southeast Asia. Why do we think this is necessary? Because we believe that AI is transformative. And we also believe that all citizens should benefit from AI. But to really benefit, they need to adopt it, to feel that it's part of who they are. And to do so, AI must seem like them. However, much of AI is not actually suitable or not representative of Southeast Asia in the following senses. First, from a culture point of view, AI really reflects those who build them, who are not necessarily from Southeast Asia, and the data that is mostly also not from Southeast Asia. Second, where digital data is lacking, what we might call low-resource languages, for example, Lao or Khmer, performance is actually not great. More fundamentally, when we train AI models, we use benchmarks and evaluation to guide that training. Like, how do I know it's doing well? Most of these benchmarks are not designed for Southeast Asia use cases or Southeast Asian cultures and languages. They are designed for more well-known languages, English and Latin scripts. Of course, the fundamental reason behind some of these gaps of data, especially public internet data, very little of the global data on the internet is from Southeast Asia. And second, linguistic and algorithmic biases, like how I represent languages that are not Latin and how I design a tokenizer matters. Here's just a bit of evidence. Maybe it's evident to many of us. On the y-axis, is studied by a couple of researchers in Harvard, looking at how we relate to ChatGPT on the y-axis, and how close our culture is to the US. And as we might guess, the closer we are to the US in terms of our cultural distance, the more it seems like AI thinks like us. To solve this challenge, the Sea Lion effort aims to build better data for Southeast Asia, collecting better data, improving the quality of data and the diversity of the data that we have, so that it can better reflect Southeast Asia. Second, to build benchmarks for Southeast Asian use cases. And here an important point is, especially when it comes to culture and alignment, that these benchmarks, what is good and what is not, is defined and built in collaboration and ultimately by the people who use them in Southeast Asia. So that's why our regional and global partnerships are crucial and important. Of course, we have better data, better benchmarks. So what does it mean? We need to prove that this leads to better data, better models, better performance. And here we, first of all, prove that we can build the models. So Sea Lion is now in version 3, very soon, version 4, all the way from small models to medium-sized models. And the performance of these models, comparable to the best closed models like GPT-4, GPT-4o, and Gemini, and Claude's Anthropic, as well as DeepSeek, Qwen, much smaller size, and among models that are open, best performing for Southeast Asia. So here, if you look at the Southeast Asian average, which is performance in Indonesian, Vietnamese, Thai, Tamil, Tagalog, our latest models do pretty well. Importantly is this coalition that I talked to earlier. And here, it's driven by a recognized need by all of us that data benchmarks are lacking. What can we do in order to make sure that the whole region benefits from AI? How can we all contribute? And I'd like to say that we have global companies, global nonprofit, academics, but also regional companies and institutions of higher learning. A concrete example of this aspect is Aquarium. Aquarium is a platform where AI builders can go to seek data on Southeast Asia. Researchers can go to figure out which data are missing and how they can contribute. And this is not just main Southeast Asian languages, but dialects and other smaller, low-resource languages such as Javanese, Ambonese, and so on. If you'd like to learn more about Sea Lion, feel free to look at our website, and we hope that you will be able to contribute to this project too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Teo. We'll get back to you with more questions about Sea Lion and bias after all the presentations. Can I invite Ibu Ayu to have your presentation, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Elina. So actually, I represent Indonesian researcher. It's okay. Research in Indonesia is not really have a lot of support, right? So it's very difficult for us as an NLP researcher to build such an LLM. LLM and chatbot is two different things. LLM is the one that we can find in the Hugging Face, right? It is the heart of the ChatGPT. But if you want to make it to become a ChatGPT, then we have another step. So Indonesia doesn't have that another step. And she only have the LLM. So this is our attempt to build an LLM, of course lower than the Sea Lion. Okay. So I would like to show you first about the supervised data. So it is quite technical, but I hope it can be easy to be understood. So this one is, I want to make, for example, a spam classification. So I have to supply the training data, which is a pair of input and output. So the input is the text, and then the output is the label of spam or non-spam. So building the LLM, we need also this supervised data, which means that we need a lot of people who annotate the data. But not only that, so, okay, this one. LLM also learn from unsupervised data. So, taking from the articles, from the YouTube transcription, from the social media chat, we take it all without the label. Just take the data and then put it into the LLM. And then how they generate text. Actually, when there is like a query and on the start token, we generate text one by one. So just generate one word, for example, Indonesia, and then this Indonesia become the next input token. Based on that next input token and the previous token also, the generative I will give another word. It is written emas or gold. And then the emas become the next input token, and then based on that, they will get another output token, and so on, until it has this closing token. So if you see here, then the generative AI, actually, they only try to guess which word is the best, which word has the highest probability. Then this word will become the output. That's why it's called the stochastic parrot, It's like a parrot. Yeah, you train a parrot, but they don't really understand what is the meaning of the word. Yeah, because of the frequency, the occurrence, then they will give you the result. So for this, it takes this unsupervised data. So everything you wrote in the internet, it will become part of their data, but not only that. Okay. So how about Indonesia and ITB? This is several of the research that have been done by ITB. We try to build the large language model also. We try to collect the data, but such as I said, it's very difficult. The problem is two, the data and also the infrastructure. We try to collaborate with others. For example, the Google DeepMind in the IndoBART, IndoGPT. It is before the ChatGPT boom. Yeah, we try to make it, but with this small data set. We also try to collect the regional language, such as not only Javanese and Sundanese, but also Maduranese, Minangkabau, Buginese. So there are several regional languages we try to collect. So not only the unsupervised, but also the supervised. So we ask the native speaker to make the annotation and then put it in the large language model. Okay. So I want to show you the example of our Nusa Dialogue. This is the research that we've done. The publish is in the beginning of this year. So it's not easy to find the native speaker help for the annotation actually. So there are 462 applicants from 3 regions, Bali, Minangkabau, and Bugis. And then after that, we try to see whether they're eligible or not, whether they're digital native or not. So it's only 118, then only 73 joined the annotation. And during the annotation itself, the difficulty is not only the server, but also the electricity. Yeah. So for example, in Bugis, there is time where one day only 5 hours the electricity is on. They have to use the electricity for the household, right? To wash the clothes and everything. So it's very difficult to get this data actually. And then this is the example of the bias. Perhaps later on we can discuss about the bias. Even in Indonesian dataset itself, it also has bias between female and male. Okay, so how human we can help handling the bias content in the AI model? Not only bias, but also harmful and hallucination. So harmful means that perhaps someone asks something about suicide, right? And then the AI, they will give you like how to do your suicide easy, something like that. It is a harmful content, right? So how to help it? We can try to divide it into 3 steps. First is data development, and then the AI model development, and then the AI model deployment. So data development is the first one. It is to provide the training data to build the AI model. Then after that, during the AI model development itself, to build the LLM. Then after that, AI model deployment, after they become the chatbot, like ChatGPT, Gemini, and everything. So, of course, in the data development, the engineer, they should design the data development to be various and balanced. The token should be, I don't know, per million and everything. It should be a lot. And then the data annotation itself, they have to, have to follow the guidance. And then the data cleansing and checking, and then providing unbiased public content. Because I think all LLM now is trying to find the public content. So we can also provide the unbiased public content. Yeah, but it's, related to the copyright. That's another thing. Yeah. And then during the AI model development, we need to test the AI model with various cases as complete as possible. And talking about various cases, I think every country has their own value that should be tested, right? So for example, in Indonesia, we still, we only recognize 2 gender, for example, in the regulation. So I'm not sure in other country, right? It's just the 2 different things. And then during the deployment, we can also do the reporting whether the result of the output of a model, an AI model, is biased or harmful or hallucination during operational. So what I want to say is that I agree with the previous session about the collaboration and also how to go together, right, among regions. But actually, inside Indonesia itself, we have a lot of problem with this. I'm an ordinary researcher. I try to go to several medias, actually, ask how they can contribute to make this large language model, how to give the contribution to the data set. Of course, we will open the data set, or it's up to the media or perhaps any bureau about this data set, right? But still, until now, it's very difficult, to go from the bottom to up. I think the spirit of collaboration, I'm not sure, perhaps other people can also correct me, it's not that high. Yeah, we have this problem also, like the competition and everything. So if we have this conclusion to make this LLM, this is a strategic thing for Indonesia and for each country, I think we can do it together. We can collect all the data. Of course, we can use it together. And then we, as the researcher, we have the algorithm, we know the technology, we can help to build the LLM, and then the government should also support on the deployment. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ibu Ayu. I saw some mouths were agape in the audience. Don't worry, when I first spoke to Ibu Ayu, I'm not a technical person at all, but Ibu Ayu helped clarify a lot of things for me, so I'm very appreciative of that. Ms. Shalini Joshi, you belong to an organization that, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's a non-profit focused on building digital tools and community-led programs to essentially enhance the resilience of the information ecosystem. Could I invite you to deliver your presentation, please?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I know there are some slides somewhere. Yeah, okay. So I work with Meedan, and for those of you not familiar with Meedan, very quickly, we build digital tools and also community-led programs that enhance the accessibility and reliability of information. Some of you here are familiar with our platform called Check. Check allows organizations to deploy tip lines, very often on closed messaging apps like WhatsApp. And people are able to gather questions, also tips and requests from audiences at scale. So with Check, organizations can find out what's most important to their community members and also provide community members the information that they need. We have collaborated with many groups in Indonesia and last year with Check Factor on the Indonesian elections in 2024. I want to talk a little bit about the problems that we are all quite familiar with commercial AI models. We know that commercial AI models push users towards a homogeneous, centralized base of information. They very regularly misinterpret facts. And also, local languages, local needs, local contexts are very often ignored. These models work very well in English, but not so well in other languages. And the previous speakers and speakers in other panels have already talked about that. And that they primarily serve commercial interests. There are also issues related to bias in AI. Ayu talked about that, and we've heard about how it's really difficult for journalists, for newsrooms, and for CSOs that want to gain new audiences, serve their community members, leverage AI through messaging and through messaging apps, but do not see any AI products built for local news. So what is it that we are doing at Meedan to address some of these problems? We are building infrastructure that is controlled by newsrooms and by the groups that are using the tools. These are tools that offer responses drawing from organizations' own reporting and from their own research and the public records that exist for the organizations. Tools that solicit tips from permissioned community members, and none of the information that is produced will be fed back to commercial AI models and providers. So going back to Check, that already exists, our software or our platform, which is meeting some of these needs. And we are trying to build on our experience of providing Check and working with newsrooms and fact-checking organizations. What we are doing now is developing an AI tool for common good. And so over the past 18 months, what we've been doing is that we have scoped and begun building infrastructure for an AI-augmented system that will empower newsrooms and civil society organizations to index and organize contextual information. So this is information that draws from their own records and research and also public records and from their own trusted community members. What this will enable journalists and civil society organizations to do is over closed messaging apps, our chatbots will deliver answers to users' questions and guide readers to articles from vetted sources. We are working closely with our partners who are providing insights, and thanks to Tempo and AMSI and Aman, the 3 groups in Indonesia that we are working with quite closely on this. And we will have this ready to share with you all quite soon. It is at an initial stage right now, but hopefully this will serve the needs of smaller and hyperlocal newsrooms, especially newsrooms that work with indigenous communities and also multiple local languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shalini. Pak Aminuddin, the mic is yours.
Right. Thank you, moderator. My presentation is more like sharing the concerns and reminders from linguists to AI scientists and developers. And because I am not AI scientist, although I was included in the 100 most influential people in AI in Time magazine. At the time, I was working on preserving local languages, and I have tried to ask AI scientists how we document the local languages throughout the country. Indonesia has 718 local languages, and many of them are endangered. And some of them have already extinct, right? And especially in the eastern part of Indonesia. This is the first reminder that we need to understand language and meaning first. And this is, I think everybody has understood this, that every language has its unique characteristics whose morphology, phonology, syntax, and semantics is different one from another. Because of this uniqueness, that language cannot be treated similarly when all AI scientists try to develop the models for the tools. The second one is that true linguistic meanings, when we try to communicate in AI, naturally, I would say that true linguistic meanings are discovered not only in the text, let's say text T, but also, and more importantly, in context C, which speakers S and hearer H share linguistically and culturally. And like Dr. Teo and also the other two speakers have reminded us that sometimes cultural aspects and cultural sensitivity are not yet included in generative AI, for example, just because of the limited data available to AI developers. What I mean by linguistically is that if we want to understand completely about the language, then we have to understand completely about the language. Otherwise, we will have the potentials to misunderstand the message. And culturally, because culture is sensitive, when culture is sensitive, then we have to understand even the subtle aspects of culture. And context C includes setting, the space and the time, spatio-temporal, the words spoken of, what we are talking about, and the textual environment provided by the text. These are the three elements that we need to understand when we want to have a more natural generative AI. In fact, this is what we have at the moment. Data sets are taken from language of the majority, and therefore local dialects are still neglected, if not ignored. And the other three, the three speakers have been aware about this, that some aspects of dialects, cultural aspects are still neglected. And the next one, data sets rely on written text available in the internet, whereas language is basically and naturally spoken. So what is more natural is the spoken form of language. It's not the written form, because language is basically spoken. And that's the primary form of language. Written form is secondary. Sign language is tertiary. And the next one, language is pragmatically and culturally sensitive. What I mean by pragmatically is that when we speak to one person with one intention, probably we convey this differently when we speak to a different person with the same intention. I speak to my student will be different from the speak I do with my colleague professors, for example, although the intention is the same. Yeah, that's what I mean by pragmatically and culturally. Unique features are not always easy to recognize and to be included into the AI algorithms. And these have been realized by AI scientists. Linguists and native speakers of low-resource languages are rarely involved in the development of AI tools. I've spoken to so many local language experts in the country, and when I asked them whether they have been involved in the AI development, and when I also asked to the AI developers to what extent they have involved the local language scientists, sometimes they only rely on the intuitions as native speakers, intuitions of the developers, not the insights from local language scientists. Many cases have been found in that. And the next one will be the potential representations of bias. This has been mentioned by the speakers. One, because most low-resource languages are not yet digitized. And secondly, data sets in the internet represent the dominant speakers with their own cultures. And this is what I can say, that this may lead to what I call as the monolingualism. And consequently, the AI tools only depict the culture of the majority. And what and how can we do better? This is what I think we can do. One is we have to audit the existing data sets. Through, like you mentioned about the data cleansing, right? Clean from bias, building more representative corpora and data sets, and piloting with one or more two dominant low-resource languages, then expand with languages of the same family. And the next one, benchmarking with multi-language data sets. This is what has been mentioned by Dr. Teo. And the next one is involving linguists, researchers, language activists, organizations, and speakers of low-resource languages, building collaboration with others. Like us in National Library, Indonesian National Library or Perpusnas, we have what we call Kastara, Hazanah Naskah Nusantara. This is a document of local languages available in Indonesia, and this has been used by so many people, and this is an open access, and I think this can become the start how low-resource languages can be digitized. And establishing communication fora, like the forum like this, I think is very useful to share the agenda and talk for the future. I think that's what I can share. Thank you.
Wonderful. Happily, we have a lot of time for discussion. Can I get you to raise your hand if you have an intervention or a question? I see a few, but if I can just abuse my privilege as a moderator, I do have a quick question for both Dr. Teo and Ibu Ayu on this topic of bias. I think what I've heard from many NLP researchers and technologists is that one way you reduce bias is to have more data. So more data in a language, particularly a low-resource language. But as I've learned, not all data and not an abundance of data necessarily speaks to good quality data for a number of reasons. So for endangered languages, how do you account for bias if there is insufficient data? Perhaps I'll turn to Dr. Teo first and then Ibu Ayu.
Data leads to bias. It's because, as actually Ibu Ayu very helpfully explained, the machine is learning from the data, and a lot of data is biased. So it's a shortcut way of saying actually it's not so much a quantity of data, but the diversity of the data, right? And the balancedness in the data. So we have bias that we know well known about when it comes to some of the generative AI that relates to gender. Why? Because most of text reflects the fact that male is one way or another preferred to female. The second is certain religions, right? Or certain nationalities. These are coming from the fact that the data itself is unbalanced or not representative in one way. So to answer your question, my first point would be in order to deal with some of these biases, we have to collect data that is more representative, right? Not just quantity, but representative and diverse. The second is actually and this is again something Ibu Ayu mentioned. The first point actually relates more to the process when we train the data. It's like when you went to primary school or your basic foundation. But we do a lot of post-training, right? Which is telling the data, this is the right answer or this is how you should answer. That's post-training tends to be find techniques that require labeled data. So it's not just the corpus, but we say this is a better answer. We say this is right, this is wrong. We say you should answer or think this way. Now, what's very important to address bias here is that the people annotating, the labelers, right, are also reflective of the diversity that we want. Right? Maybe I can't give really some egregious examples because this is because there are many great examples when it comes to religion or lifestyle where, you know, to an American annotator, there's nothing wrong, right? In fact, he or she might say something that would be very insulting in our culture, right? Again, nothing wrong. By the way, I'm not a big fan of censorship. I think more the holy grail for us is for the machine to realize that human experience is a bit more diverse and to be open, right? So if you're an annotator and to you this is a very bad thing or a very good thing, but culturally actually there's a dispersion, but you come from just one culture, you're going to say it's wrong and you're going to train the model to be that way, right? So those are the two big, at least for me, mitigating things we need to do. And indeed, this is why when we build C-Line, we are very, very conscious. There are some things that, you know, as academics and as in a more objective way, we can do. But when it comes to value, when it comes to cultural alignment, it really does need the community to reflect that. And so actually, Ibu Ayu and her students are great partners of ours. But across the region, we work with 30 other organizations to do a lot of the annotation. It's actually quite foolish for us in Singapore to think that we can align any model to Southeast Asia. It's also actually within countries, what's rural, what's urban, there may be different views. So one of the challenges, but one of the opportunities is to, this is why collaboration is very important. Right? People need to feel that the AI, they have a say in the AI, they contribute to AI, and one of the best ways to do so is to do this, if you like, post-training part where we try to make the AI more aligned to our worldview while remaining faithful to the diversity of, you know, worldviews that exist.
Thank you, Dr. Teo. Ibu Ayu?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Teo. So actually similar. The idea is not only data actually, but data is the biggest part of it. So if we mention about the data, data might have biases. Biases is very related with the value. The value, it can be from the people who annotate the data, or it can be also from the documents, from the articles, available in the internet. So if for example, a media, they have their own bias on a sensitive issue, for example, and then this value in the document will be inputted into the AI, right? So the AI will have the same bias. So the ID is the source. And then you ask, how if the data is small, right, for this low resource language? So another point is not only the quality, like Dr. Teo already mentioned the quality, but also the tasting data. So we need to test the AI with a complete tasting data, complete related with the sensitive issue. Yeah, gender, religion, and everything. That's one of the point. And another thing, we can also add like a guardrail. Guardrail is usually used to filter the harm input or the harm response from the LLM, but we can also put the bias classification into the guardrail. Yeah, so not only the data, but also the component. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I saw Sergio, your hand was raised first. Can we get a mic to him? I see a few others. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for this. This is fascinating talk. Last year, Meta did something very interesting that they created a language recon method using the Bible to recognize, 1,000 different languages or whatever, because the Bible is, their argument is that the Bible was the most translated book ever, and it was how many languages, different languages and stuff. And I thought this was really unconventional, but at the same time, they're trying new approach to solve the sort of questions that arise regarding, inclusion of different languages and stuff. So I wonder if you guys, in your work, working in very highly complex language questions, I wonder if you are seeing such types of unconventional approaches to solve this sort of problems right now.
And your question is addressed to the whole panel or specific members of the panel?
Well, it can be addressed to the whole panel, but I think maybe Professor should.
Okay, let me just collect one more, and then this will be our first round. Sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is James Gomez. I'm from the Asia Center, and we have just set up an AI hub looking at democracy and human rights. So you'll get a sense of the perspective I'm coming from. I think yesterday and today, I think the meeting in this room has been silent about 2 or 3 things. One, I think we didn't discuss about state-aligned media, right? In many countries in Southeast Asia, you have state-aligned media. They not only put out one-sided, authoritarian propaganda. In certain countries, these national news agencies also serve as cover for surveillance and spying on their neighbors and their citizens abroad, So I think that's one element I think that's been missing from the discussion. The other element is I think we have not discussed the political. We have been very polite to talk about culture and so on, but not the politics, which I think is another silence in the room over the last 2 days. And I think that should be clearly addressed. When we are talking about AI research, especially in the region, I would be mindful of the universities, think tanks that operate in the authoritarian context, including independent consulting firms that take on money from the state, especially from authoritarian regimes. So these also bring in natural biases. So there's a bias within the bias, right? And I think that's important to think about, right? If you go to Singapore and you look for death penalty, you know, the AIs will politely avoid giving you a clear answer, right? What more in Vietnam, right? So I think we have to be mindful of that point. We have not discussed those things, and I think those are important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to return to the panel for this first round, and I know there have been a number of hands, so hopefully, yes, I recognize you in the back. Hopefully we'll get at least 2 more rounds. So perhaps I'll start with Pak Aminuddin, and then we'll go down the panel.
Right. Let me explain the difficulties that we have when we try to document the low resource languages in Indonesia, for example. And when we want to develop the AI tools, one has to do with the conventions on which language that we have to develop. Because even in one form of language, like let's say in my own language, Sundanese, it has so many dialects. It has so many subdialects. Javanese is the same. So the question is which standard or which form of language that have to be developed and that have to be admitted, agreed as the form that we want to put in the system. That's one thing, yeah. Because when I try to develop the system for local language testing, I developed the standard form, and some other people said, no, that's not the form that we want to agree because we have different forms of language. So up to now, we are still struggling with determining the agreed form. Number 2 has to do with the number of speakers of the local languages. Like in Papua, we, for example, have found speakers of a language which are only 50 people. And of course, this is the data from them will not be representative, while we have heard from researchers that representativeness of data is one of the key elements. And number 3 has to do with I would say the phonological system, the pragmatic aspects of the language. The pronunciation of a language from one language to another, although from one dialect to another is also different. And when we try to record our voices, for example, in the system, in the tools, and again, we are thinking of which pronunciation will be accepted as the standard form. I think these are the 3 elements that are very striking in the development of AI tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Aminuddin. Ms. Joshi, would you like to respond perhaps to the question about the many biases, bias within bias, or whatever you'd like to respond to?
Yeah, I think that you know, the issue that you raised about state-aligned media is quite serious, especially for many countries in the region. I know that there are also state-aligned fact-checking organizations, and many groups have come together, independent media groups and also independent fact-checkers, to form their own coalitions and are actively talking about the threat from newsrooms that are aligned with the state. I strongly believe in coalitions, collaborations, consortiums, and I think that many newsrooms that are small with limited resources, small teams, are pulling in their resources, knowledge, experience to talk more about this. So I see that as a way forward. And just in terms of the language issue, I really liked what you said about piloting with a few languages initially, low-resourced languages initially, to see the response and then taking that experience to other languages, which is also something that we are trying to do, working with a few languages and getting feedback on that and then moving to other languages.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ibu Ayu, would you like to add anything at this point? No pressure.
Yeah, I think I am interested in the political things like you say. The state aligned news is very difficult because in Indonesia, LLM has other problem. So I think people kind of related with this AI thing, the large language model. Now, it hasn't been a concern yet. Yeah, but we have this hoax, like fact checker, Check Fakta, for example, Mafindo. We have several independent organizations, but related with the artificial intelligence, such as the chatbot, the LLM, we are still not considering about that from the researcher side because we found that there are many other problems which we think that in the meantime it is more urgent. For example, the AI for children. So there are a lot of students now in Indonesia, they're using this chatbot to ask about their homework. So it's kind of a big problem for us because it makes like this cognitive thinking of the students become less. And then not all teachers have this literacy. I even talked to teachers, they said that, okay, we know the student, they use the ChatGPT, but we cannot do anything. Why? Because there are too many students. It is impossible for me to ask one by one. So that's one example of the problem in AI. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Teo. Would you like to add your thoughts?
Actually, people have tried. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Have tried to do things like put in the Bible or let's say a dictionary and say it solves the problem. Maybe first point to make, actually, I don't like the word low resource language because it gives the impression, a certain impression. I think more accurately what we mean is languages that are not well represented in digital space. Right? The community behind the language might actually be very large. Second point to make as background, we haven't said this, there are, depending on how you count it, between 1,000 to 1,300 languages in Southeast Asia. It's a very diverse region, but perhaps 20 or 30, is 80% of the way. And then, we will have debates about where's the long tail and how much, but I think we have a very diverse situation to deal with and not a lot of data, right? And all of this pretty much we would say falls in the low category of low resource. Although again, Bahasa, Vietnamese are far ahead of Khmer or Lao, for example. Now, it's very tempting to just take the Bible, take the dictionary and say, I solved the problem. But actually, work has been done to show that this leads to very narrow kind of outcomes, right? It might be okay, it might be actually for translation, but it cannot work for generation of new text where it doesn't work, it doesn't sound normal. If you use the wrong translation, it sounds like King James, like a chatbot talking to you in King James English, its worldview will be very different. So it turns out that it's tempting, but doesn't work. However, the idea behind it actually is something we didn't also mention, which I want to give a tribute to, which is that actually we're all benefiting from cross-learning, right? One of the reasons why it's so powerful is because actually, even though most knowledge is in English, it's actually very good knowledge And if I have enough bahasa, it translates really well and it helps the bahasa do really well also. Right? And this is one reason why these big models work. There's a lot of transfer learning and cross-lingual performance. Of course, where some gaps exist, like it doesn't know Sudanese, and actually with our partners, that's a model called Sahabat, which has Sudanese and Javanese. Actually, literally, we have to take Sudanese and Javanese and put it into the learning corpora in order for it to work. But we must not forget that the big picture is that we are actually benefiting from a community and the transfer learning and the cross learning. Second point to make, I think, it's a question about biasness. Actually, it is true. Maybe I would generalize it. We should be careful. Any group that dominates this very powerful technology. So you can say it's state-owned. We can also say they're big tech. We can also say they're capitalist. There are inherent biases, right? And if we care about, many ways of approaching this problem, I would say some institutions still have a chance of being independent. Maybe not completely, because even in research, money dominates. But certainly, actually a very good example is when we look at languages like Bahasa and Vietnamese or Khmer and Lao, do you know that the biggest problem is that most of it is advertising and propaganda. Why? Because there's one inherent interest here, money. Right? Corporations are willing to pay to generate marketing information. No one's willing to pay high quality journalists. And if you're an academic, if you have a great idea, you're writing in English. So we do inherently work in this one. This is the reality of the world. Question is, how do we address, and again, we have many things to address, as Ibu Ayu says, what are the priorities, right? Pick and choose. And the last point to make is, if we get these models really good, they are very useful to our citizens, right? Because they can understand nuances, they understand dialect, they can help a coder who doesn't have to speak in English code, right? Do many powerful things. But there is a double side to this, which is that I've created a machine that can also misinform, convince, generate fake news, and all sorts. In fact, there is probably more profit motive to generate fake news than there is real news, right? And so these are things we have to deal with. Maybe as an AI researcher, my answer is to point out that this is the consequence, but it's never just technical, right? A society has to decide, which is also why I'm a big fan of AI. Is too important to allow just the AI and scientists to work on. Everyone needs to be involved. These are problems that we will face. It's not about the technology. It's about how humans use the technology.
Thank you, Dr. Teo. It's very validating because as a non-techie, I also thought that the term low resource language was a bit patronizing, but I understand it's a term of art. Okay, I saw a number of hands from the women in particular, and so I'm going to try to get as many as possible in this round, just in case we don't have enough time for a third round. I'm going to start with Ibu in the white suit jacket.
All right, thank you. I'd like to share our experiences. When we talk about collaboration, my research hub, Data and Democracy Research Hub, we already collaborated with Azis during the election, actually, to monitor hate speech and online polarization toward vulnerable communities, 7 vulnerable communities. And then we also monitored in local election. There are 5 provinces. It's really challenging. We also collaborate with the CSO SafeNet from yesterday, monitoring hate speech toward Rohingya refugee. We've been working around 35 human annotators for those 2 projects. what I could say about bias is that the demography of the human annotators also influence the data, and then based on our experience, instead of working with the people from the community, journalists and civil society organization activists is actually really helpful because we monitor hate speech and online polarization. It's really specific, not just language, yeah. So I think journalists and CSO activists, they're really more sensitive compared to the local community themselves, yeah. Second one, I'd like to share about what's next. So we're not only working on establishing the LLM model, but we also advocate, along with our collaborators, advocate to the platforms, to the government. Let me tell you something. We come to Meta with 1.5 million social media data across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, during the elections, specifically on vulnerable communities. We come and then we tell them, even before the elections, the traffic of hate speech is so high, was so high. And then they said, oh, we've done this, we've done that, you know, and then along with Aji, we also come to the election commission. And then what their reaction is like, oh, it's actually the same with the data that we monitor. For us, you know, like at least we can write an academic paper, right? But for, I don't know about like the Journalist Association or the CSO. Second one, when we were about to monitor hate speech in the local election, that time Facebook already closed the CrowdTangle, so we have to reach out to our collaborator in the United States to get the research API for TikTok. And then I talked to TikTok. I'm going to monitor hate speech on TikTok. You better give me also research API, or I'm gonna find a research API for it. And then we collaborate with Boston universities. We put it in the media, and then there's also like we write op-eds. After that, TikTok come to us and ask for that data. So I send them to Aji. Just talk to Aji if Aji wants to give you the data, because it's collaboration, right, between the Journalists Association and the universities. What I'm trying to say is that we did collaborate. We did have the academic papers, but we want this collaboration also make an impact for the communities. So I think after this, we also need to, this is probably like academician, we rarely think about the advocacy because like, okay, this is our paper, this is the policy brief, policy paper, something like that. But I think because in this forum we have CSO, we have journalists, I think we really need to make this collaboration like impactful, not only present to them, but also like do more than just that. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Over there, you've been very patient, you know. I'll come to February afterwards.
Thanks very much. I'm Irene Liu, and I'm the Director of AI, Emerging Tech, and Regulation at the International Fund for Public Interest Media. So as one of the co-organizers of the conference, thank you all so much for speaking on this panel. The reason why we wanted you to join us on this call, or this conversation, is because we are really looking at the intersection of tech and journalism, and in particular, the challenge we face around the sustaining of journalism from an economic standpoint and its relevance in society and technology. And so I think, Dr. Teo, what you said really resonated with us, because in this world of information, increasingly, propaganda, mis and disinformation, and also PR are richly funded. The only thing that has a monetization problem is independent, timely, verifiable information, of which journalism is a part. So I want to ask I have two questions. The first one is very pointed to Ibu Ayu and Dr. Teo, which is, as journalists, we often say, our content is so valuable because it's verified and we have ethics. So therefore, why don't people want it? And on the other side, the big technology companies will often say, journalism accounts for such a small, tiny proportion of information out there. So we will do a deal with Reddit, but we're not going to do a deal at scale for journalistic content for AI training. So as the two technologists that are building LLMs, can you please tell us what is the value of journalistic content in all its forms, whether you're talking about photography, video, text, voice, to the LLM development? And if you can comment also on RAG and future products. That's the first question. And then the second question, Ibu Ayu, when you said that you were having trouble collaborating with media, I think that the question I have for both of you is, what do you need from us? How can we collaborate? How can we co-build between the journalism community and all the output that we make and the co-building of this technology for this region, for our societies and our communities here? Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. February, you're next. I know you've been waiting. Thank you for your patience. And then I saw Pak Wahyu, yeah, you had a question. Are there any other hands, burning hands, before I turn it back to the panel after that? Okay, I see none. Please, Ibu February.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, by waiting then, I have three questions, but the other one has been asked by Irene. But one thing that haven't been asked is the issues of copyrights. I think we talk about training the LLM with the local language, but then how? I read some news in Singapore. The government want to use the writers and then content in the local language into the LLM. But then some writers are coming ahead that they are having concern on fair use of those. We don't want to remain the current problem with the Western or global North problem of using our content without fair use, right? So how we navigate this? Thank you.
Thank you. And Pak Wahyu.
Yes, thank you, Elina. I really appreciate the four speakers for working and building on less representative languages, not to say low resources language. But I wonder, do we see enough synergy in this process? Because we've been informed that building a large language model is really expensive. It takes a lot of resources, data centers, human annotators, etc. And at the other end, we have a lot of languages that needs to be digitized and then put into the individual large language model. Do you, as technologists, as people working on this field, do you see enough synergy? Do we pool our resources enough to help build this really needed AI tools? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a little under 6 minutes. I will hand it over to Ms. Joshi, and then we'll work our way on from there.
Well, I think I'll maybe respond to Wayu's question about languages and what do we do with languages that don't have scripts and that are spoken by many people. Some of the previous speakers have also talked about this. I do think that creating data sets in some of these languages is really essential, and having data sets that are good in quality may actually be as good as having data sets that have a lot of content, but very generalized content. So just going back to what I said earlier and what the previous speaker also said, that maybe starting with a few languages, piloting our work in those languages is important at this point.
Thank you. Pak Aminuddin?
Two things I would like to mention. One has to do with the number of local languages that have scripts in Indonesia. Only 13 languages out of 718 local languages that have scripts. And this adds to the difficulties in representing the local languages in the system when developing the AI. Like 2 years ago, when I was still in the language agency, we wanted to have a text in local language in Papua. And when we tried to put this in Latin, they said, no, that's not like that one. The pronunciation is different, the representation is different, so that's not the way you have to represent our language in that Latin script. So it was very difficult, just because of the differences in the pronunciation. Yeah, that's one thing. And when asked whether there is enough synergy, yeah, although at the moment I work for the National Library, but I still have good connection with the language agency where I was the director. In my collaboration with them, yeah, I have asked their help on trying to document the local languages, yeah, the corpus for each local languages where local offices are found. For example, in Aceh, yeah, we have so many languages, yeah, more than 13 languages are there, and we ask them to document these local languages. And language agency has 30 local offices, yeah, branch offices, and at the moment they are trying to document as many local languages as possible. So this will be used as the sources for the next step. Yeah, yeah, yes, I think. And one more thing, I would like to comment to the comment that was given by the first commenter. During the local elections, yeah, as you mentioned, there were so many hate speech utterances found in or during the campaigns. And as a linguist, I was often asked to become the language expert to analyze this, just because of the abundance of data for all candidates, let's say, or for the supporters of its candidate. And then the police officer said, when I had to give up, just because if we process these reports, then from the other supporters, for the other parties, will have the same thing. And then almost no reports will processed, yeah, just because of the abundance of the data, yeah, in hate speech. Yeah, I agree with you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Aminuddin. Ibu Ayu?
Okay, so I would like to answer about the collaboration. So actually related with AI, not only building LLM. So there's also other thing, non-LLM. So for specific function, for example, has speech detection or perhaps hoax classification and everything. So the problem is that first, we are kind of like live in separate worlds. So perhaps we need to try to collaborate more. So for example, the NLP researchers in Indonesia, we've built this Nusa catalog, which provides open data sets for all of the researchers if they want to use the same data set. And it become the Southeast Asia crowd, now become the aquarium, which is now being hosted by Singapore. So actually from the NLP researcher side, we are very open to the collaboration. So the open data set is one of our attempt for that. So I think perhaps this one's also answering the next, what's next? I think we can like do some deeper collaborations and then discussing about what kind of the technology needed by this journalism community. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Ayu. And Dr. Teo, you get the last word.
Maybe three things. One is on the copyright question. It's a very tricky question, or the value of journalism. What I would say is that actually our laws allow fair use, and some countries, to some extent, Singapore falls in this category, but so does Japan, actually says things like, if you use the data for machine learning, you're not subject to copyright. It's not, you're not infringing on copyright. That's kind of the Swiss interpretation also. So there's fair use, there's what copyright law actually says. But for us, actually, maybe I have been actually accused of being very conservative. I think the way it has to work is with permission and licensing. Right? So basically, if people really object, perhaps there is a way to figure out how to give them in return. What is the objective? There may be moral objections, as I don't like AI, I don't want to use AI. That's very different than, actually, I don't really object if you give me my due, right? And to some extent, that's actually what I think the middle way, right? We should use the data, but we need to give some reward back to the creators of the data. That leads to why is it been so difficult to work even in Singapore, right? Someone just said, oh, maybe everything is under one state. No, actually, we have two state media companies, and they both behave very differently when it comes to collaboration. And the big part of the big reason is that everyone is under pressure to monetize, and nobody knows what the right price is, right? And so there is also this, like asking too much, asking too low, or not willing to actually do anything while you figure out how to, if you like, find value from your data. The sad thing I like to tell many of these media organizations is that a lot of stuff is already on the public internet. So over time, whatever you have, if you keep it too much, it somewhat becomes irrelevant. I mean, and this is about formal media. Second point, I guess I want to make it is, it doesn't seem hopeful, but we have actually some examples. One, McDonald's is a very efficient machine for serving food, right? And we have McDonald's across the world, but we still have a lot of restaurants. So just because something is cheap and efficient doesn't mean that our societies want it all the time. Another extreme example is Leica, right? Who would pay so much for cameras that don't really do modern stuff, right? Like, the most expensive Leica cameras are very manual, right? And Leica has managed to keep this. So for me, the journalists of the future, or journalism of the future, will hang high on those humanistic values that we care. Critical thinking, right? Knowing when to follow and when to break the rules. Building trust, right? If I actually trust my journalists, actually this will be a problem, right? Because I read so much news. If I can have a news source that I trust and the journalist is trustworthy, I think that is something that I'm perfectly willing to say I don't need advertising to pay for. And fourth, I think ethics, right? The human value. So I do think as a practitioner of AI, I'm not despondent at all. What is the simple things will go away? What the things that we don't think about, half of the stuff in the internet today, unfortunately, written by AI, the quality is very low, right? When it comes to products, it's even worse, right? It will come about, I think, that humans are going to figure out there is a way we will pay for things that really matter to us. but we will have to adapt. Maybe I stop there, it's a bit long already, but I guess maybe I just want to emphasize, oh yeah, it does lead to the third point. Someone asked about collaboration. Actually, in tech, we have a model, it's called open source. In our region, we have a word, gotong royong. We have long history of working together, right? And if Ibu Ayu wouldn't mind, I mean, I will use the sea lion example, right? Because what we do, so basically what we do with sea lion is we take, originally we tried to do everything ourselves. Now we work on top of the best, you know, it could be a Chinese builder like Alibaba, or it could be Google DeepMind, Meta, or Meta, the previous version of Meta. What we do is, you know, they do the work, they open source it. We take that open source, and in Singapore, because we have a slightly more resources, we can spend the money to build, to do the, not the trillions, but the billions of work, right? The billions of tokens to train the model to a level. But because of open source, we keep it in the open, and Ibu Ayu and her students can take it, and they can do the next supervised fine-tuning, adding in local and regional stuff, and call it, you know, call it their own. We have no claim on it. Right? It's open. It's passed on. And for me, at least, this story of what they've managed to do gives me a bit of hope that we can still build representative AI collaborating, getting around some of the problems with monetization IP, because we have this open source framework that has been tried and true in tech. And if you like, harkens to the old gotong royong spirit that we all grew up in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Teo, for bringing us to that hopeful note to close on. We're a little over time, but I trust you'll agree with me that this has been a fascinating and insightful conversation, and hopefully it will kickstart more discussions moving forward. Thank you all, and I'll hand it back to the MC.